speak here today in front of you. And my talk is really about practitioner scholarship, and I'll kind of present you with a methodology for doing that. And at the end, I'll try to make a suggestion with regard to what I've presented. So, in the first part, I will speak a bit about practitioner scholarship and why it may be considered particularly problematic in the study of esotericism. I think there are various reasons for that. And then I will actually try to overcome that to a certain degree by presenting a methodology that I think may solve some of the problems and may actually, I don't know, create a possibility for practitioner scholarship to be more accepted in academia. This is really one of my personal goals and objectives, and also in the projects where I work that were just mentioned. This is one of the core objectives, is to transcend or dissolve or destabilize the boundaries between scholar and practitioner. And I'm obviously also standing here as a practitioner scholar myself in front of you, and therefore I'll also use one of my own experiences and experience reports to illustrate the methodology that I suggest. And then at the end, I'll arrive at some conclusions. So, let's first begin by asking why a talk like this is actually necessary. So, there is hardly any literature about practitioner scholarship out there. There is not even a real debate going on. It has never really happened in the study of esotericism. This is quite weird because in other disciplines, let's say Jewish studies, Islamic studies, theology, Buddhology, and so on, it's taken for granted that practitioners, they can also be good scholars on these fields. But in the study of esotericism, there was quite from the beginning on a reluctancy to be frank about it. So there is a big elephant in the room, always on SW conferences, or should I say there are many elephants in the room. So there is a problem with admitting that people also practice. And why is that so? So I think there are various reasons. The first one could be contact guilt. So when esotericism studies was established in academia, it had a hard start, we might say. So one of the strategies was to distance SW or proper academic esotericism studies from practitionership and from practitioner positions and perspectives, just to kind of wipe the slate clean in a way, because there are obviously prejudices about practitioners and practitioner positions. So these are prejudices, stereotypes. One might assume that practitioners are more naive than scholars with regard to their own practices and experiences. They may be more uncritical. They may pursue religionist agendas and so on. And these things are considered problematic from a scholarly perspective. And the ultimate stereotype is that of the anthropologist going native, who kind of completely loses objectivity, whatever that is, and then engages in advocacy of the tradition that he or she ought to be studying objectively. And so another reason for this bad reputation may be the problem of ritual efficacy. So while in other fields like theology, I don't know, Jewish studies, Islamic studies, Buddhology, there might be an acceptance with regard to the concept of God or the efficacy of meditation and so on. So this is considered maybe less problematic than a straightforward understanding that a ritual has an effect, an outer-worldly effect that is not only psychological or social psychological. And this is still, I don't know, maybe one of the last battles that we have to fight, that this idea of ritual efficacy is maybe taken more serious. And then I should end my short list with the problem that there is actually no methodology out there for doing practitioner scholarship and doing it in a way that is maybe accepted in academic discourse. And so my talk today is actually trying to get a foot in that door and maybe change the game a bit. I don't know. Let's try. Let's see. Let's see how it goes. So I think if we think about developing a proper methodology for practitioner scholarship, I think 5 things are necessary. This is like a standard idea of what scholarship or science is about. It should be systematic observation, systematic description, systematic or good analysis, classification, and explanation. And I'm not reinventing the wheel here, so I just took a few things that I thought would make sense in each of these fields, and we'll go through them step by step. So for instance, in observation, I'm inspired by Edmund Husserl's phenomenology, description, of course, autoethnography, and various new approaches in the field of autoethnography. And then we move on through various tools that I kind of assemble here. So beginning with observation, I'm inspired, as I already said, by Edmund Husserl's phenomenology, which is also described as the study of structures of consciousness experienced from the first-person point of view. So today I'm really speaking about experiences. As a practitioner, when I practice myself, I have experiences, and when I want to take these experiences also as part of my data set, I need to begin with a good observation, and phenomenology is the obvious candidate. I'm not speaking about the phenomenology of religion, which is in many ways a distortive later development of Husserl's phenomenology. So I really want to start with Husserl himself, but of course I can only do it in a very microscopic way here. So I'm taking 2 things of phenomenology, which is a complex philosophical school in itself. And one is that we have to be honest, fine-grained, and sense-oriented in our self-observation. This is one of the key points about phenomenology. And the second aspect is epoché. You probably all have heard this somewhere. It's the method of bracketing or suspending judgments of existence about the things we observe. And this is connected to the notion of intentionality. So Husserl said, whenever I observe something, there is an intentionality in my mind to make sense of it right away. And this is connected to expectations also, what I expect to find in the world. And these things, they should be bracketed or suspended. This is the method of epoché, in order to get a more sensuous and fine-grained understanding of one's own perceptions. And I think when we apply this to practitioner scholarship in the study of esotericism, the crucial point is to be honest, as I said, honest, fine-grained, and sense-oriented. And honesty means that I observe myself as honest as possible, so I don't make 2 steps after one. Can one say that? No. Anyway, so for instance, you conjure Baal, the first spirit of the Goetia, and you do the evocation, and then you suddenly get goosebumps, and your sight becomes blurred. And when you apply these methods of honesty and epoché, you simply note, goosebumps and my blur is sight. I'm not automatically making the judgment, cool, Baal is here, my ritual worked. Okay, this is basically the idea. And it should be nuanced, and this means that I focus on small time units and pay attention to micro details in my own self-observation. And it should be sense-oriented, so I observe while undergoing the experience. I distinguish my senses, my sensory apparatus, smell, hear, touch, taste, and vision. I also focus on the interoceptive, vestibular, proprioceptive, so the internal observations within my body, and also the equilibrance and all the senses that come with it. And I also carefully observe the emotions and my thoughts in the process of observing my own experiences. This is basically what I would take from Husserl for a more systematic self-observation in esoteric practices and experiences. And then the next step is obviously a good description of my experience. And here I'm inspired by so-called evocative autoethnography, and especially the technique of artful ethnography or sensuous writing, as recently outlined by Paul Stoller in his new book, Wisdom from the Edge. And the idea here again is that the description should again be honest, fine-grained, and sense-oriented. So you describe everything from the first person as you observe it, you differentiate your senses, and you apply epoché, and that's how you describe the experience. And it is, of course, crucial then after an experience to directly take notes, to remember and memorize and write down everything as accurate as possible. And Paul Stoller is very good in teaching how to write in a way that captures the reader, because he pays special attention to landscapes, soundscapes, experience-scapes, in order to create a vivid impression in the reader. And we, as practitioner scholars, should take this and include also internal land and sound and spacescapes, because much of the esoteric practice and experience is about internal experiences, as you all know. Now, the good thing about this is that it's actually fun to write this way, and it's also fun to read reports who are written this way. So the whole thing is not extra work, but it's actually fun to do it. But in order for this to not become too abstract and, I don't know, scholarly, I'm standing here now with an example from my own experience from last year, where I tried to apply these tools. So, here it comes. Are you ready? Yes. Cool. The light is not good for reading, but I try my best. I am standing in the center of my stone circle. Thank you. With my eyes facing south, setting my gaze loosely on the valley that stretches out in front of me. I sense the trees behind me, for I have placed my circle in the liminal zone between the forest at my back and the meadow that leads further downhill. Beyond that meadow, I see the last remnants of sunbeams reflected on the peak of the large tent where I had received my instructions a few hours ago. This is actually a photo from the spot where I made the experience. I stand alone in the twilight. Oh, okay, the twilight picture is that one. Oops. Okay, that's the twilight picture. It has taken considerable effort to collect the large stones that mark the 8 cardinal and non-cardinal directions of my ritual circle. My stones were much smaller than these ones. And it was similarly time-consuming to trace the circle with 6 different substances, among them tobacco, salt, and so-called dragon's blood, while uttering the protective prayer that I was instructed to say by my ritual guide, the so-called monitor. I hold the prayer stick in my hand and test the degree of my anxiety, which has almost vanished since I've completed the long conjuration of celestial and various other Amerindian spirits. Among them, Sohotoma, Ehetoma, the Hokshidahe, the Tungashida, the Tushilahe, the Chulamadahe, and of course Wakantanka, the Great Spirit. So this was a neo-shamanic movement where I did fieldwork. I do not feel the urge to shield myself with skeptical rationalism from the experiences that may be coming. My mouth still retains traces of the taste of the prayer cigarette that I had to use for the conjuration, an unpleasant necessity as I am not yet a pipe holder in this tradition. My task in the ceremony is to confront angry ancestors that have a skull to settle with me. I have never done this before. It is the year 2022, and the evening still carries with it some of the warmth of the day, for the month of June has just begun. I'm surrounded by, so this is the twilight, and I'm surrounded by German ticks, one of which would later bite me, enriching my life with a severe outbreak of Lyme disease. But that's another story. I'm in the Black Forest in southwest Germany, participating in the so-called ceremonial days of the sweet medicine Sundance Path. Having fasted and performed manifold preparations throughout the whole day, I'm about to delve into one of the core ceremonies of the so-called second gateway. There are 15 gateways in total in this movement, the ancestor speaking ceremony. I take a step towards the stone in my circle that marks the south. I perform a weird combination of movements, stomping my feet on the ground and clapping my hands several times, alluding to the numerological significance of ancestors in this tradition, which is 6. Afterwards, I speak out loud, "Ancestors of the South, I am calling you." I close my eyes and observe my inner and outer senses. I see, hear, and smell nothing apart from silence. I allow roughly a minute to pass, waiting for something to occur. Nothing happens, so I move on. Turning my body to the southeast, I repeat the combination of stomps and claps. "Ancestors of the southeast, I'm calling you." Again, nothing happens for roughly a minute, and I begin to wonder whether I'm doing something wrong. Do ancestors appear in a manner too subtle to be detected by my sensory capacities? Are my anxieties too strong, suppressing any possible encounters? I stop this brief streak of rationalization and turn my body to the eastern stone of my circle. As soon as I stomp and utter the words, "Ancestors of the East, I'm calling you," I suddenly feel a strong inner sensation of sadness, and I glimpse an image on the surface of my inner eye. I see a woman in a room of strange colors and costumes, as if coming from a distant time and place, possibly somewhere in South India in some pre-modern century. Much more intense than this inner image is the emotional impression of a profound sadness of which I was completely unaware just a few seconds before. The sadness is so strong that I have no choice but to start crying. So I cry and let loose the tears while maintaining my focus on whatever it is I'm encountering here. Again, I see glimpses of an image of a woman, but now it seems clearer that I feel her emotions, that it is her sadness I am experiencing. Why do I feel this so intensely? I have no explanation apart from the mere fact that this woman is sad because of me, because there is or there was a connection between us. So I continue to cry, I cry her tears and wait for more to come. The inner encounter with this, should I say, sad spirit lasts for several minutes. For some time, I try to explore the reasons of her sadness, to grasp more details of her identity and our possible linked karmic story. However, I discern little. So I continue to focus on the emotional aspect of the experience, which is by far the strongest, and move forward to the next phase I've been instructed in by the ritual guide, namely negotiation. For the goal of this ceremony is not remembrance of past lives. The sweet medicine path offers other practices for that, but rather the pacification of angry spirits. Towards this end, I engage in a negotiation with the spirit, or rather I negotiate with the sadness inside of me, asking what it needs to find peace. To my surprise, we quickly find a simple compensation. I have to light 3 candles on 3 subsequent evenings while thinking of that entity and sensing its sadness. I agree to this and feel a direct release of the sadness that has occupied my body over the past minutes. We say goodbye and I step back into the center of the circle. The sadness and the seeming impression of that ancestor is gone. I feel calm and quiet, and I'm positively surprised at how intense this first encounter was, and especially with how well the negotiations went. I still have 5 directions to go. Northeast, nothing. North, again, I sense an immediate reaction. This time, instead of sadness, I feel sympathy. Indeed, I'm surprised by the sheer level of positive vibrations that I receive all of a sudden, a degree of positivity which just feels unusual. At night in the forest. I'm immediately reminded of what the ritual guide told me during the briefing that afternoon, which was that instead of angry ancestors, one may occasionally also encounter supportive ancestors. Ancestors that are willing to vouch for me on the other side and that can be called before ceremonies for additional support. In contrast to the previous encounter, which seemed to be connected to a former life, this one seems to point instead to the ancestral line of my mother. I have a clear inner understanding, or should I say an intuitive knowledge, of an encounter with a male figure related to my mother, possibly a cousin of hers who died somewhere in the 1950s, and I even receive a surname. This time I have a direct, clear, and quick inner grasp of relevant information, transmitted seemingly from his mind to mine without words, but there are no visuals. So I just took this as an image. I learned that this spirit wants to support me because I bring light into the darkness of my mother's line, which is characterized by ongoing violence, the abuse of power, and suicide. I'm overwhelmed by the positive sympathies this spirit offers me without asking for anything in return. And again, I have to start crying, touched by the feeling of being supported by an ancestor who had died long before I was even born. He assures me of his support in my future endeavors, and we say goodbye. I step back into the circle and am again able to quickly recalibrate myself towards a neutral and open state of mind. I turn to the northwest. Nothing. West. There is an immediate sensation of something fuzzy. With my inner eyes, I sense a flickering light at the outer side of my circle, and I wait. The quality of this encounter seems different from the other two. This time, there is no direct sensual or emotional reaction within me. Rather, I feel the need to be cautious and alert. Indeed, the ritual guide had warned me that random local spirits might be attracted by the spiritual light that is produced during my ceremony in the outer darkness, and these spirits will try to enter and disturb the ceremony by disguising themselves as ancestors. I was recommended to test these spirits by asking for their name thrice, for such a spirit cannot lie 3 times in a row. Even though I considered this a totally odd and arbitrary claim when I first heard it from my ritual guide, in this moment I decide to make the use of that test. The weird flickering light cannot even pronounce the same name twice, and I quickly make my decision. This is not an ancestor and nothing worthy of devoting my attention further. I take the prayer stick, hold it towards the thing, whatever it is, and command it to leave, making use of both my will and my outer voice. To my surprise, the thing immediately withdraws, leaving me in silence. I step back into the center of my circle and focus on the 8th direction, southwest. It reveals nothing. I sit down and remain in quietness for some time, surprised by the intensity of the whole encounter and the impressions they have generated. Over the course of the next hour, I relateralize the ritual circle, return the stones to where I had found them, pick up my stuff, and make my way back to the tent, where I report my experiences to my monitor. So, that was the experience report, and if we remember, this was my 5-part methodology. So now we move on to analysis. This is me, because now it's about my analysis. I'm in full Sundance gear. Okay, the good thing about this methodology is that this way of both observing and describing the experience is already an analysis in the sense of a systematic dissection of the various components of the experience. So now we only have to add a few things to make this description part of a scholarly discourse, namely contextualization and comparison. Contextualization is crucial because in esoteric practices, the practitioner, him or herself, is the context. So contextualization in this case means each report producer has to reflect on her or his own cultural and biographical background, training, personality and sense types, beliefs and so on, because all of these things affect the experience, beginning already with the observation and also the description. And the next step would then be to compare these reports to other reports, because if we don't compare it, it is just one subjective experience. But the goal is to go from subjective experience to an intersubjective co-production of knowledge and a shared discourse. So I'm going through this very quickly. In my case, the interesting thing I found was that I've never actually trained spirit encounters before that. But at that time, I was a fairly well-trained Tantra yogi, so I had a daily sadhana of 1 to 2 hours for the 4 years before that experience, meaning that I think it heightened my intuition, my capability to be inspired, my sensitivity, especially my interoception, my internal observation of my body. Also, it created trust and resilience. And I did have various karmic visions during intense yoga practice, so this was not new. But what I found peculiar is that the 3 encounters, they were on different levels. So some were very emotional, some were more visual, some were very intuitive, and I also had an auditory experience at the end, which I did not enter into this report. So there were different qualities, which I found quite interesting. And also, what is also important to note, that each of the 3 spirit types, they were actually announced before the experience. So I may have approached it with expectations, but I would also say that I was very surprised by all these encounters. And I asked myself a bit, this is too good to be true. So I encountered all the spirits perfectly that the ritual guide told me. It was a bit of a textbook experience, and I haven't come to a conclusion with regard to this question. What I also found very interesting is the abrupt changes through the ritual steps. So I actually only had to make a step, and I got out of a specific, for instance, a very strong emotion. This is not typical when I have personal emotions. I don't get out of them with a step or with negotiating, like lighting a candle or something like that. And I may also add that I had a very strong sense of authenticity and efficacy, so the ritual obviously worked. The imagination was purely passive, so I did not actively imagine anything. And also important, there were no repercussions after the ceremony. So I did not feel better because of these candles, so nothing actually changed. Maybe one has to do hundreds of these, I don't know. So I'm running out of time, and I have 2 more things to say, and I'm going through them very quickly. So the next step would be to classify these reports, and Ann Taves has developed a very interesting questionnaire just this year. It's called the Inventory of Non-Ordinary Experiences. I'm not going into this now, but this is a typology that is very useful for classifying many of these reports eventually into many different baskets, because she does not only focus on peak experiences, but includes the whole stuff esotericists are familiar with, like spirit encounters, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, and so on. So this typology can eventually be used. And the next thing I wanted to present, but maybe I skip it because it's kind of a far, how do you say that, far throw? No, far stretch. So there is this model called predictive coding. And the idea is that the mind does not just receive sensory data, but actually constantly predicts the next moment and tests this prediction against the sensory experiences, which then function either as confirmation or as error signals. And practices like that, which are very hallucinatory, we might say, or vision-oriented, function within this model in a way that top-down processing is favored against bottom-up processing. So sensory data is suppressed, so error signals don't go through, and then you can actually delve much deeper into visionary experiences. It's a good model that explains some of the stuff we experience. And I might add that the model does not explain whether something is real or not. It just explains how the mind works in these situations. And Tanja Luhmann is also a scholar who has worked with this towards the idea that enhanced practice, years of practice, actually change the way our mind works, how we observe things, and it actually explains why you can get better at so-called inner sense cultivation. Because it changes the way bottom-up and top-down processes are negotiated within the mind. And the point is that we are all experts of inner sense cultivation. And this brings me to my last point, namely the co-production of knowledge. So my first take-home message of this presentation is that this is not even rocket science, but I think when one applies this methodology, most stereotypes that I mentioned at the beginning, they can just go into the dustbin. Because when we produce data like this, it can be used like any other data, which is usually taken from third persons, so through interviews and so on. But if practitioner scholars would begin also conceptualizing their own experiences in this way, then of course this data can be used. And practitioner scholars are even in an advantageous position against scholars who are purely dry or theoretical or historical, because practitioner scholars train their mental apparatus towards being more receptive towards these experiences and also making better sense of it. So I think we can even turn this around, and practitioner scholarship in the study of esotericism is much in need, and it is absolutely not problematic. And so this conference is, of course, also a co-production of knowledge, and I think we all in this room engage in theoretical or practical research, and this room is also full of experts of inner sense cultivation, and I think we can make a next step, namely towards a more systematic sharing and comparing of our own practices, experiences, in order to understand that we in fact have different experiences. They depend on our personalities, our sensory types, and so on. And we could even build a database about this. I mean, it's a possibility. We also cannot do it, but I mean, the possibility is there. And so this is the point where I want to point your attention to the fact that I'm a founding member of RENSEP, the Research Network for the Study of Esoteric Practices. And on the website, we have a button where you can upload an experience report like this. If you're interested in producing reports or sharing your knowledge or your experiences, there is a possibility to do it on our website. You can remain anonymous. You don't have to enter any personal information, not even a name or an email address, but you can, of course, if you want to be contacted, you can add your email address, and then you can just upload the experience report. And what will we do with it? So RENSEP is a non-profit, charitable, private organization. We don't have profitable interests. We're not interested in fame. We just want to bring forward knowledge about esoteric practices, and especially, we want to work towards destabilizing the boundaries between scholars and practitioners and really work towards a co-production of knowledge. This is one of RENSEP's core missions. And we want to build bridges between scholars and practitioners of different kinds, scholars of different kinds, build a network, and we also fund research. So maybe you've seen this flyer. We have a tandem paper prize, for instance, which is still on, and interesting artists stipend. So if you're interested, you can approach me after the talk, or also Andrea Centore or Kevin McLaughlin. They are also board members of RENSEP. And there I am. I'm finished. Thank you for your attention.